Late 1944. World War II had entered its most dangerous phase. The Allies had already broken out of Normandy. Paris had been liberated. And across the Western Front, there was a growing belief that the war in Europe was nearing its end. But that belief was wrong. Deep inside the Ardennes forest, German forces were regrouping in silence. They weren't retreating. They were preparing. Their goal was simple: cut Allied supply lines, isolate forward units, and destroy them before help could arrive. That's how an American infantry battalion found itself moving too far ahead of the main line. The order was routine: advance into the Ardennes, secure key terrain, observe enemy movement, hold the position until armored units caught up. On paper, it was a standard mission. In reality, it was a trap. The maps were outdated. The weather was collapsing rapidly. Snow, fog, and freezing temperatures, swallowing the forest. Radio signals weakened with every mile forward. Supply trucks struggled to keep up on icy roads. Still, the battalion pushed on. They believed German resistance was light. They believed support was close behind. They believed command knew exactly where they were. By nightfall, none of that was true. German units had quietly moved around them. From the north, from the east, from the south. By the time American scouts realized what was happening, the battalion was already surrounded. Radios failed, messages went unanswered, the supply line was gone. Over 800 American soldiers, isolated in freezing conditions, low on ammunition, with no clear way out. And dawn was coming. At first light, German artillery would open fire. Machine guns on higher ground would seal every exit. If the battalion stayed where it was, most of them would be dead. Within hours, command was contacted again. Nothing. No reinforcements. No air support. No evacuation plan. Just silence. That was when one soldier noticed something strange. A narrow opening in the forest, barely visible beneath snow-covered branches, not marked on any map. Most men dismissed it as nothing. Just another illusion, created by fog and exhaustion. But one staff sergeant didn't. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't famous. He didn't command men from behind a desk. He was infantry, a veteran who had learned one hard lesson in war. Sometimes survival depends on what feels wrong, not what looks right. He studied the corridor, longer than anyone else. The terrain, uneven, dangerous, completely unscouted. But it was the only direction not covered by enemy fire. There was just one problem. No one knew where it led, and finding out meant one thing. Someone had to go alone. Volunteering wasn't bravery. It was almost suicide. If he was captured, this deep behind enemy lines, there would be no prisoner camp, no interrogation, only disappearance. Still, he stepped forward, without orders, without witnesses, without expectation of recognition. He moved into the forest as night deepened, step by step, slowly, carefully. Snow muffled his footsteps. Branches snapped quietly in the dark. He stopped often, listened, waited. German patrols passed close enough to hear their voices. At one point, enemy soldiers moved within a few feet. He didn't move, didn't breathe, because one sound would mean the end of the battalion behind him. Hours passed. Cold burned through his hands and legs. Fatigue pulled at his mind. Then, finally, the forest began to thin. He reached the other side, and that's when he realized the truth. The corridor worked It led past German positions, around their artillery, away from the kill zone, but it was narrow, fragile. It would only work once. He turned back immediately. By the time he returned, dawn was approaching. Exhausted, frozen, but alive, he gathered the officers and explained what he'd seen. There was no time to confirm with command. No time to wait for permission, either. They moved now, or they died where they stood. The decision was made. As the first light touched the forest, the battalion began to move, single file. No lights, no talking. Hundreds of men followed a path discovered by one soldier who had refused to wait for orders. Minutes after the last unit cleared the forest, German artillery struck their original position. Shells tore through empty ground. Had the battalion waited even 10 more minutes, none of them would have survived. They lived. Official reports later described the event as a strategic withdrawal. Maps revised, records filed, but the name of the man who made it possible never appeared. No medal, no citation, no ceremony. After the war, he went home, like millions of others, returned to a normal life, never spoke publicly about that night. And history moved on, because wars remember victories, not scouts, because paperwork matters more than instinct, because heroes without witnesses rarely exist in official records, and because sometimes the people who save the most lives do it quietly, without orders, without recognition, without asking to be remembered. An entire battalion survived because one man chose action over permission, because one soldier walked alone into enemy territory, because bravery doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it wears silence. History tells us who won wars, but it rarely tells us who saved lives. That is why these stories matter, not to rewrite history, but to complete it. Because somewhere, between maps and reports, there are heroes whose names were never written down, and they deserve to be remembered. They lived because one soldier chose courage over certainty, because one man refused to let fear decide. And though history never wrote his name in stone, his actions echo through every life he saved, somewhere in the quiet archives, in maps, reports, and whispered memories. He is still there, not in medals, not in ceremonies, but in every story of survival, every battalion that returned, every soldier who saw another dawn. So this is why we remember. This is why we tell their stories. This is why the forgotten are never truly lost.